Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Creation Myths. Answers in Genesis, the Young Earth Christian nationalist propaganda organization based in Kentucky, keeps their people on a notoriously short leash. They have their own, videos and podcasts and everything, and interviews by AIG people outside of the AIG media ecosystem are few and far between. Ken Ham does not like his people being in a place where they don't control the message. So imagine my surprise when an interview with Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, AIG's Harvard PhD, who admitted he just got his degree so he could lie about it, premiered on Standing for Truth, the amateur YouTube Young Earth ministry so embarrassingly bad, even compared to other Young Earth ministries, they've been given the sobriquet the Brain Trust. Of course I had to watch, because of course I did. A couple of interesting things came out of this interview, like two, maybe three things. And I'm going to talk about one of them right here, the last one that happened in the interview. At least I think it's going to be the one that's furthest along that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to show a clip here that's Donnie's question, right? That's Donnie Badinsky, aka Standing for Truth, the host of this interview. And then I'm going to show Jeanson's full answer. It's going to be a little bit long, but I want everybody to see the full context before we talk about it. The question is going to be about mutation rates and substitution rates, and specifically how to respond to the critics of young Earth creationism, and specifically Jeanson's work calculating the most recent common ancestors for the human mitochondrial and Y chromosomes. In doing this, Jeanson uses the mutation rate, the rate at which mutations occur, as the substitution rate, the rate at which mutations achieve fixation in a population. And it's only the substitution rates that are relevant when you're calculating the time to most recent common ancestor. In order to squeeze the genetic data we have into the young Earth timeline, Jeanson just takes the mutation rate and uses that as the substitution rate. So that's the setup here. Let's watch the clip and then we can talk about it.
And so I just want to get this question in here because I know the critics are going to comment with it. And so maybe kind of put it to bed, which in many ways you have, even in this program. But you've talked about your fulfilled predictions. It's working. The critics are not engaging it. They've failed essentially. But they'll keep going back. People like Dan, they'll just keep going back and saying, well, in a way, the predictions, the findings, especially with history and trace, and they had names, we don't need to pay attention to those because the mutation rate data that originated with these predictions, if I'm understanding correctly, the faster rates in mitochondrial DNA, faster rates in the Y chromosome, they'll say none of that really matters because Dr. Jeanson, he's treating a substitution rate as a mutation rate, or we should be focusing on the fixation rate rather than the per generation rate, because selection removes a lot of those genetic variants over time. Or I know this is a big question, so feel free to just give a nutshell answer, but perhaps he's including somatic cell mutations. I know you're familiar with all this. So as a way to kind of wrap up the program with a bang, the critics are going to use this argument. What's the best way to just shut it down and get everybody really focused on the work that you're doing in books like Traced and They Had Names, Dr. Jeanson?
Dan has really been a great gift to creation science in this way, because if you watch his videos, I think it was the one response to Traced, he tries to bring up that point. But his justification, so let me back up and define the terms. So substitution rate versus mutation rate. What I had been arguing going back 15 years or so replacing Darwin 2017, but the research precedes that. I've been looking at mitochondrial DNA early on, female inherited DNA, looking at how fast or slow do mothers, or let me back way up. Mutation rate is how fast or slow does mom mutate the DNA to daughter, because we're talking female inherited DNA. And I'd been saying, based on the literature, which is fairly contradictory, so I just took all the raw data and pooled it, and it came out to about an average of one mistake every 5 to 10 generations. Way too fast for evolution. Very good confirmation of the young Earth timescale. I've been saying that measurement in the present, get mom, get daughter, how many differences are there? That's what the data was based on. I had been assuming that rate had been consistent in the past. It's basically uniformitarianism. A mouthful of a term meaning the present is the key to the past. That's, of course, what evolutionists love to do in geology, and don't bat an eye about doing it there. Creationists have spent a long time saying, no, a flood would dramatically change rates of change in geology. So it's ironic, if not hypocritical, for the evolutionists now to turn around and say, oh, wait a minute, you can't assume the present is the key to the past. I'm like, well, you've been doing that for decades. So we're only allowed to question it if it contradicts evolution, number one. It's hypocritical. Number two, so that's a substitution rate. Substitution rate is over a long period of time, many generations, extrapolated into the past, how fast does DNA change? And the evolutionists have tried to argue that some mutations can happen, but they get lost by natural selection, or eliminated by natural selection, or lost due to drift. Anyway, converting measurements in the present to the past has been a task. There's plenty of papers trying to do this because, again, the mitochondrial mutation rates were too fast. So they're trying to figure out a way, how do we reconcile these observations with the predictions of evolution? The biggest gift, though, from Dan has been arguing that I'm wrong on mutation versus substitution rate because the textbooks say otherwise. It's worth laughing at because for so long we've been accused of being religious dogmatist fundies who say the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. Their attitude is the textbook says it, I believe it, and that settles it. It's a fundamentalist atheistic religion or agnostic religion, whatever you want to call it. It's textbook religious behavior. It's exactly what they've accused us of doing for so many years. You know, if I made up the story, you wouldn't believe me, but we've got it on video. So thank you for doing that, Dan, and showing this is ultimately religion. I mean, I've been trying to grant them generosity, be generous in granting them good motives and trying to do science, but when they just out and out say, no, we're doing religion because you disagree with our holy book. Okay. Nothing more I can say about that. Anyways, that's been a great gift. The refutation, of course, to what he's saying is to back up, we measure stuff in the present. How do we know it's been continuous in the past? You can assume something different. You can say, well, if it disagrees with the textbook, then it must be wrong. But then we're just treating the book like a holy book and said, we're not doing science anymore. We're just doing religion. What we should be saying scientifically is, how can we test whether or not the rate in the present has been continuous in the past? And lo and behold, for example, this is what makes me laugh again. Back to that paper that Dan wants to ignore. 2019, I published companion papers, back-to-back papers on the male inherited Y chromosome DNA. So I'm going to come back to mitochondrial DNA for a minute. I started 2009, 2013 dealing with mitochondrial DNA and the rate of change that I said measured in the present, confirmed young Earth creation. Yes, it's assuming it's been consistent in the past. My argument for saying it was that multiple independent species across phyla were all in agreement. So how can you explain that away? Anyway, it still makes predictions that future experiments could reveal to be true or false. That conclusion that I drew. Evolutionary conclusions should make predictions as well. Well, switch over to the male inherited Y chromosome data, 2019. I say, look, based on publicly available evolutionary research, the rate of change from fathers to sons, because it's Y chromosome male inherited DNA, is fast, once again, consistent with mitochondrial DNA. But that's a testable hypothesis to assume that what we see in the present has been consistent in the past. Well, I tested those predictions with that same paper that Dan wanted to ignore. That's actually literally ignoring. I'm not ignoring Neanderthal DNA. He's ignoring the paper. I tested Neanderthal DNA. I also tested the hypothesis in that paper, whether the fast rate of change between fathers and sons has been continuous in the past. And if it has, we should be able to see the history of population growth recorded in family trees based on DNA within a 4,500-year time scale. That was a complicated paragraph, but the point being, the short summary is, we measured those changes, then we test the predictions. The predictions have been confirmed. Last summer, with mitochondrial DNA, finally confirmed over multiple generations the predictions that I laid out and the predictions that naturally flowed from the conclusions that I laid out for mitochondrial DNA many years ago. So there's all sorts of rebuttals to their statements. So I'm conflating substitution rate and mitochondrial rate. No, I'm equating substitution rate and mutation rate because the data says so. And if they can't wrap their minds around, no, this is hypotheses that you can test. If they can't wrap their minds around the fact that this is science, you make hypotheses, you test them with experiments, then there's no help. We've left the realm of a scientific discussion. It's just pseudoscientific religious speculation, which is where it's at. It's just nice to have the mask finally pull off and see them do it without prompting on recorded camera so that we can see where things stand.
The thing I want to point out here is that Jeanson won't even try to accurately represent my argument, even though Donnie tried to do so in his question. He actually mentioned a couple of aspects of my actual argument in the question, and Jeanson just didn't even try to address them. And I do wonder if Donnie caught that Jeanson just did his own thing, kind of independent of the question that Donnie actually asked. Instead of addressing things like somatic mutations, he just went with his because it's in the textbooks straw man. And to be clear, my argument against Jeanson's methodology is not, well, this is what the textbooks say. My argument against using the mitochondrial mutation rate as the substitution rate is based on actual observations of mitochondrial inheritance and mitochondrial diversity. I've talked about this a lot over the years, so some of the videos I've done on this are linked down below. I'm not going to go through the whole argument here, but very briefly, let me just mention 3 big things that Jeanson might have tried to address if he was going to honestly grapple with the critiques of his work. So first, we've directly documented strong purifying selection operating in most of the mitochondrial DNA. And since the mitochondrial DNA is recombining, that means the control region, the small, faster mutating region that creationists often focus on and incorrectly extrapolate to the rest of the mitochondrial genome in terms of its mutation rate, even that region will experience background selection because of its linkage to the rest of the mitochondrial DNA. Selection reduces the substitution rate relative to the mutation rate, so you can't use the latter as the former. Jeanson has never addressed this. Second, the papers that creationists often cite, and most importantly for this video, the 2015 study that Jeanson uses to derive his mitochondrial mutation rate, do not screen out somatic mutations. Somatic mutations are mutations that occur outside of the germline in the body. So they occur in the somatic cells, the skin, muscles, whatever, all the tissue that doesn't make gametes. But only germline mutations can be inherited, so the inclusion of somatic mutations artificially inflates the rate of mutation accumulation, which invalidates Jeanson's calculations. Jeanson has never addressed this. And third, we have direct observations that the mitochondrial substitution rate is slower than the mutation rate, based on multi-generational pedigree studies. You don't even have to go back more than a handful of generations. You could go back a century and a half to 2-3 centuries, and you're going to see those two numbers diverge from each other. For example, King et al. 2014 and Connell et al. 2022. I'll link those down below. Jeanson has also never addressed this. That's the short version of my argument against Jeanson using the mitochondrial mutation rate as the long-term substitution rate. But again, here's what Jeanson says.
The biggest gift, though, from Dan has been arguing that I'm wrong on mutation versus substitution rate because the textbooks say otherwise. It's worth laughing at because for so long we've been accused of being religious dogmatist fundies who say the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. Their attitude is the textbook says it, I believe it, and that settles it. It's a fundamentalist atheistic religion or agnostic religion, whatever you want to call it.
This is such a perfect distillation of the young earth approach to critics generally and Jeanson's approach specifically. strawman the argument, make no attempt to address the substance, and treat your young Earth audience like they're stupid. And I mean that seriously. Think about the level of disrespect to Donnie that Jeanson is exhibiting here. Let's watch Donnie's question again real fast. Here's Donnie's question.
People like Dan, they'll just keep going back and saying, well, in a way, the predictions, the findings, especially with history and trace, and they had names, we don't need to pay attention to those because the mutation rate data that originated with these predictions, if I'm understanding correctly, the faster rates in mitochondrial DNA, faster rates in the Y chromosome, they'll say none of that really matters because Dr. Jeanson, he's treating a substitution rate as a mutation rate, or we should be focusing on the fixation rate rather than the per generation rate, because selection removes a lot of those genetic variants over time. Or I know this is a big question, so feel free to just give a nutshell answer, but perhaps he's including somatic cell mutations. I know you're familiar with all this. So as a way to kind of wrap up the program with a bang, the critics are going to use this argument. What's the best way to just shut it down and get everybody really focused on the work that you're doing in books like Traced?
Okay, you see, he actually has, for all his flaws, listened to the argument I have made. He mentioned some of my actual critiques in his question. Jeanson completely ignores all that to give his canned answer, the same one he gave in a video responding to me like, I don't know, it was like 3 years ago at this point. It was a straw man then, it's a straw man now. Do you think Donnie realized that Jeanson didn't even try to address the thing he actually said? This is not new. Creationists have been doing this for years. I've pointed this out, that most creationists have a few canned responses that they deploy based on hearing like certain key words. Now, a lot of those responses are a bit more sophisticated than what Jeanson does here, which is just mutation, substitution, they're just quoting textbooks, aka their holy books, right? That's a particularly dumb version of the argument he could be trying to respond to, right? That's particularly egregious. But many creationists will do the same kind of form of argumentation where they have just this canned thing that they've memorized that's like a couple of sentences. So they hear, mutation substitution rate, and they'll do the pedigree studies, Parsons, FBI, right? Jeanson's doing the same thing, just in a dumber way. Now, I don't know if Jeanson's young Earth audience realizes the disservice he's doing to them. If any of them try to use Jeanson's argument here against someone who actually knows the science in question, those creationists are going to get buried under actual technical arguments that the professional, credentialed creationists have left them completely unequipped to answer. Do the professionals have answers to the real arguments as opposed to their straw men? Or are they ignoring them because they don't and they're hoping nobody notices? Or are they so high on their own supply they think that what they're doing is actually giving good answers? I don't know. I really, for some of them, don't have a strong opinion on it. In a lot of cases, I think they're just lying. But in some cases, I kind of go back and forth between all of these, but it kind of doesn't matter, right? The responses just are what they are. The last thing I want to just briefly mention here is that I guess the best way I would put this thing that Jeanson is doing is this is offensive to me, and not just because he's strawmanning my arguments, but I find, as somebody who is a science communicator and is trying to convey, to my audience the other side of the issue that Jeanson is talking about, as someone who is practicing something that is similar, right? We're doing similar things here. It is offensive to me that he is approaching that project in the way he is. I think it's pretty clear that I go out of my way to make sure I am accurately representing the creationist arguments I refute on this channel. I see that as an obligation to my audience. If I'm giving you bad information about the creationist arguments you encounter, I'm setting you up for failure. And in addition to that being a dick thing to do, I would expect that to rebound back on me at some point, as people would realize the information I was providing is no good. Apparently, professional creationists, and certainly Jeanson here, have no such qualms. It's just endless straw man leading to a generation of young earth creationists, the amateur young earth creationists who argue on the internet, who don't even understand the arguments they're trying to refute. That's really the result of what Jeanson is doing here. Or, I don't know, maybe he could make an honest attempt to address the actual critiques. But I've been waiting on that for a bunch of years, and I don't think it's going to happen. And the last thing for real I would like to do here is just directly address Donnie, Standing for Truth. Donnie, this is an honest question for you. Do you think that the answer Jeanson gave in response to that question was a good answer? I am genuinely curious what you think of that response to your question. I would love to hear your answer to that. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please remember to hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe, share, do all the algorithm-friendly things before you go. Also, I'll remind you that if you become a channel member, you will have immediate access to pre-recorded videos like this without having to wait for the public release. Thanks again for watching, and don't get fooled.